It was late September, just after the first chill had settled over the Cascade Range, 2014. The wind carried a bite that night, cutting through the trees like a whisper that wouldn't stop. I remember the crickets, too. They were loud that evening, but even their song couldn't drown out what came next. I shouldn't be telling you this, but it's been years now, and I guess it's time. My boy Ricky had been gone for 3 days before we found him. No one believed me then, not even the sheriff, and I don't expect you to either. But I still have the picture, the clip I won't ever show anyone. No one would understand. They'd just chalk it up to exhaustion, to something my mind invented after too many sleepless nights. But it's not. I know what I saw, and I know what Ricky lived through. I didn't just find him that day. I found proof of something that should have stayed a myth. The morning Ricky went missing was like any other. We were on a short hike, just him and me, nothing too serious. It was supposed to be a quick walk to clear our heads after a rough week at school. I remember the air, crisp with early fall cold, and the faint scent of pine needles crunching beneath our boots. We'd gotten separated for a moment. Just a moment, I thought. I called for him. Nothing. I thought he was playing around, messing with me like he always did. But when I didn't hear his laughter, the panic started to creep in. I remember walking back faster and faster, trying not to scream his name. Nothing in my body told me this was anything other than a child's prank. Until I saw the trail, the one that wasn't his. The prints were massive, way bigger than any boot I'd ever seen. They led off the main path, deeper into the thick brush where we never went. I followed them for maybe 20 yards before I lost the trail completely. The ground was too hard, too rocky. I backtracked, calling Ricky's name until my throat hurt. The forest felt different then, quiet, like something was listening. I remember standing there, hands shaking, trying to decide whether to keep looking or run back to the car for help. That was mistake number 1. I kept looking. By the time I made it back to the trailhead, the sun was starting to dip behind the ridgeline. I was alone. Ricky was gone. The weeks after were a blur. The search parties, the media, the endless trail of dead ends. The sheriff organized teams, brought in dogs, even had a helicopter fly over the area twice. Nothing. The only thing I could focus on was the rustle of the trees and the feeling of being watched. I could never shake it. I wasn't alone in those woods anymore, even when I was standing there by myself. The smell in the air, rich and earthy, wasn't the same as before. It was as if something had changed the very essence of the forest. I'd hear the whispers from the other searchers, dismissing it as animals, maybe a bear or a coyote. But deep down, I didn't believe that. Not anymore. The ranger, a woman named Torres, came by the cabin on the 4th day. She was kind, patient, asked me to walk through the timeline again. I told her about the prints I'd seen, the massive ones leading into the brush. She nodded, wrote it down, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "Black bears," she said. "They're all over this area in September. Paw prints can look human-sized, especially in soft soil." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that Ricky had just wandered off and would turn up cold and hungry but safe, but something in my gut told me otherwise. Torres left me her card, told me to call if I saw anything unusual. I slipped it into my pocket and watched her drive away down the gravel road. That night, I heard the knocks for the first time. 3 sharp raps against the side of the cabin just beyond the tree line. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening. The sound came again. 3 knocks, deliberate, not random. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the window, shining it out into the dark. Nothing, just the trees swaying in the wind. I told myself it was a branch, something knocked loose by the storm rolling in. But when I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, I smelled it. That pungent, wet musk, like something that hadn't bathed in days. Something that had been close. Very close. It wasn't until the second week that I found the first real mark. I was walking the ridgeline where Torres had told me they'd lost Ricky's scent. The dogs had stopped there, confused, like the trail just ended. I knelt down and found it pressed into a patch of damp earth, a print, bigger than anything I'd ever seen. It didn't make sense. I know what bear tracks look like. This was different, almost human, almost. The toes were distinct, the arch pronounced, but it was massive, nearly 18 inches long, maybe more. I took a photo with my phone, hands trembling. I called Torres. She came out the next day, studied the print, measured it with a tape from her truck. "Could be a bear," she said again, but her voice was quieter this time, less certain. Sometimes they step weird, make tracks that look off. I didn't argue with her. What was I supposed to say? That I thought a Bigfoot had taken my son? She'd think I'd lost my mind. Hell, I was starting to think I'd lost my mind. But the print was there. Real. Undeniable. Torres took photos, said she'd run it by someone who knew more about wildlife. She never called me back. The knocking continued every night after that. 3 raps, always around 2 or 3 in the morning, always from the same direction, out past the shed where we kept firewood. I started sleeping with a chair propped under the doorknob, kept a hunting rifle my ex-husband had left behind next to the bed. I didn't know what I was afraid of. Or maybe I did. Maybe I just didn't want to admit it. On the 10th day, I found something else. A basket, woven from pine branches and grass, sitting on the porch steps. Inside were berries, clean and arranged carefully. No note, no explanation, just the basket. I brought it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for an hour. Who leaves a basket of berries in the middle of a search for a missing child? It didn't make sense, unless someone was trying to tell me something, unless someone knew where Ricky was. The knocking grew louder over the next few nights, still 3 raps, but harder now, more insistent, like whoever was out there wanted my attention. I started leaving food on the porch, bread, apples, leftover chicken from dinner. Every morning it was gone. No animals had touched it, no tracks in the dirt, just empty plates. Torres came by again on day 14, asked if I was holding up okay. I told her about the knocking. She suggested it might be stress, that I should consider staying with family for a while. I nodded, said I'd think about it. I didn't tell her about the basket or the food. That night, I heard Ricky's voice, faint, distant, like an echo carried on the wind. "Mom," he said. Just that. Nothing more. I shot out of bed, grabbed the flashlight and the rifle, and ran barefoot into the woods. I didn't care about safety or protocol or what Torres had told me about staying put. My son was out there, and I was going to find him. I followed the sound of his voice, pushing through brambles and low-hanging branches, my feet bleeding on the rough ground. "Mom," he called again, closer this time. I ran faster, and then I saw the eyes. Big, dark, unmistakable. They weren't human. Not entirely, but they weren't far off either. They were watching me from behind a massive cedar tree, maybe 30 feet away. I froze. My breath caught. For a moment, everything stopped. The wind, the leaves, even the noise in my head. The only sound was my heartbeat. Those eyes, I don't know how to explain it. They were watching me. They weren't afraid, but I was. I raised the rifle, finger on the trigger, but I didn't shoot. Something in those eyes stopped me. Intelligence, recognition, not threat. The eyes blinked slowly, then disappeared into the darkness. I stood there for what felt like hours, shaking, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Eventually, I turned and walked back to the cabin, legs trembling, mind racing. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the porch, rifle across my lap, watching the tree line. By morning, I knew. I knew it had my son. By now, I wasn't just searching for Ricky anymore. I was looking for something else, someone else. And then it hit me, that word I couldn't say out loud. Bigfoot. I hate even saying it, but that's what it was. A Bigfoot had my boy. The stories, the whispers from the old-timers at the gas station, they were true. My mind tried to reason with me, tried to tell me that it wasn't possible, but the evidence was all around me. The prints, the knocks, the eyes in the dark, and that musk in the air, thick and unmistakable every time something happened. It all led to the same conclusion. I started researching, spent hours on forums reading reports from hikers and hunters who claimed they'd seen something in these mountains. Most of it was nonsense, blurry photos and secondhand stories, but some of it rang true. Descriptions of creatures 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, leaving tracks just like the ones I'd found. Reports of gifts left on porches, of children going missing and returning unharmed days later with stories about a big friend who kept them safe. I didn't know whether to be terrified or grateful. My son, my little boy, was out there, and he was being protected by something I couldn't explain. The sheriff came by on day 16. He was less patient than Torres, asked pointed questions about whether I'd been drinking or taking anything for stress. I told him no, told him about the evidence, the prints, the knocking. He looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Ma'am," he said, voice flat, "we've had 40 people out here searching for your son. If there was something to find, we'd have found it." I wanted to scream at him, wanted to drag him out to the ridge and show him the print, make him smell the air. But I didn't. I just nodded and thanked him for his time. That night, the knocks came again. 3 raps, louder than ever, and then something new, a low, guttural whoop that echoed through the valley. It wasn't human. It wasn't any animal I recognized. It was a call, a signal. I grabbed my coat and flashlight and went outside, heart pounding. "I know you're out there," I said into the darkness. "I know you have my son." Silence. Just the wind in the trees. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest, I heard it again, Ricky's voice, calling for me. I didn't wait for permission this time. I followed the sound of Ricky's voice, deeper into the woods than I'd ever gone before. The terrain was rough, rocky outcrops, and fallen logs everywhere. My flashlight beam bounced off the trees, casting long shadows that moved like living things. I called his name over and over, but he didn't respond. Just that single word, "Mom," repeated every few minutes like a beacon. I stumbled over roots, scraped my hands on bark, but I kept going. Something was guiding me, or someone. The smell hit me first, that thick, musky odor I'd come to recognize. It was stronger here, concentrated. I slowed down, swept the flashlight in a wide arc, and then I saw it. Not just the eyes this time, the whole thing, standing in a small clearing maybe 40 feet ahead, partially hidden behind a stand of young firs. It was massive, 8 feet tall, maybe more, covered in dark brown hair that looked almost black in the weak light. Its shoulders were broad, arms long and powerful. It wasn't moving, just watching me. And next to it, sitting on a log, was Ricky. "Mom," he said, voice calm, too calm. "It's okay. He's my friend." I don't remember running to him. I don't remember crossing that distance or falling to my knees in front of him or pulling him into my arms. I just remember crying, holding him so tight I thought I might break him. He was warm, alive, unharmed. His clothes were dirty but intact, his hair matted but clean underneath. He smelled like the forest, like pine and earth and that musky odor, but he was okay. He was safe. When I finally looked up, the creature was still there, watching us, not threatening, just present. "It's Bigfoot, Mom," Ricky said quietly. "I know it sounds crazy, but it's real. He found me when I got lost. He's been taking care of me." I wanted to tell him that was impossible. I wanted to grab him and run back to the cabin and lock every door and window, but I didn't, because looking at that creature, seeing the way it stood there calmly, I knew Ricky was telling the truth. This thing, this Bigfoot, had protected my son. For 16 days, while we were searching and crying and losing hope. This creature had kept him safe, fed him, sheltered him, and now it was giving him back. The creature made no move to stop us as I pulled Ricky to his feet. It just watched, those dark eyes following our every movement. I tried to say something, tried to find words that made sense, but nothing came out. What do you say to a Bigfoot that saved your child? Thank you seemed inadequate, insane even, so I just nodded. Once, a small gesture of acknowledgement. The creature tilted its head slightly, then turned and disappeared into the trees. No sound, no broken branches, just gone. Ricky talked the whole way back to the cabin. He told me how he'd gotten separated from me that first day, how he'd panicked and run the wrong direction. He'd fallen, twisted his ankle, and couldn't walk. That's when the Bigfoot found him. He picked me up, Mom, just lifted me like I weighed nothing. I was scared at first, but he was gentle. He took me to a cave, gave me berries and water. He showed me how to stay warm. Ricky's voice was full of wonder, not fear. He spoke about the creature like it was a person, a protector. I called Torres the next morning, told her Ricky had returned, that he'd gotten lost and found his way back. I didn't mention the Bigfoot. I didn't mention the cave or the creature that had cared for him. Torres came by within an hour, brought a medic to check Ricky over. He was dehydrated, but otherwise fine. No injuries, no signs of trauma. The medic called it a miracle. Torres looked at me with questions in her eyes, but she didn't ask them. Maybe she didn't want to know. The sheriff came by later that day, took our statements, seemed annoyed that the whole thing had resolved without his department's help. Kid probably just wandered off, built himself a shelter, ate berries, he said. Lucky he didn't run into a bear. I nodded, agreed with everything he said. It was easier that way. Ricky stayed quiet, glanced at me occasionally like he was waiting for permission to tell the truth. I shook my head slightly. He understood. We let them believe what they wanted to believe. That night, after everyone had left, I took Ricky out to the porch. We sat together in the old rocking chair, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. "Why didn't you tell them?" he asked quietly. I thought about it for a long time. "Because they wouldn't understand," I finally said. "And because that creature out there, that Bigfoot, he doesn't need people coming after him with guns and cameras. He saved you. The least we can do is protect him back." Ricky nodded, leaned against my shoulder. We sat there until the early morning hours, listening to the forest. And just before dawn, we heard it. 3 soft knocks from the tree line. A goodbye. Or maybe a promise. In the weeks after Ricky's return, I found evidence everywhere. Things I'd missed during the search, or maybe things the Bigfoot had left deliberately. A woven mat near the ridge where Ricky said the cave was located. Stacks of smooth river stones arranged in careful patterns. Strips of bark peeled from trees at precise heights, way higher than any person could reach. I photographed everything but told no one. Ricky drew pictures of the creature, detailed sketches that showed the shape of its face, the length of its arms. He said it had kind eyes. He said it hummed sometimes, low sounds that rumbled like distant thunder. The media eventually lost interest. Missing child found safe became yesterday's news within a week. The story was filed away, another mystery solved by luck and resilience. Nobody questioned how a 7-year-old boy survived alone in the wilderness for over 2 weeks. Nobody asked why he showed no signs of distress or fear. They just accepted the official version and moved on. That was fine with us. Better than fine. It meant the Bigfoot was safe, unknown, protected by our silence. I went back to the clearing once, a month after Ricky came home. I brought supplies with me, blankets, canned food, matches. I left them stacked neatly near where I'd last seen the creature. I didn't know if it would understand the gesture, but I had to try. The next morning, everything was gone except one blanket, folded carefully and left on a flat rock with a single white feather placed on top. I picked up the feather, held it in my palm. It felt like a gift, like acceptance. Ricky asked if we could visit the cave. I told him no, not yet, maybe never. It wasn't our place to intrude. The Bigfoot had given him back to me. That was enough. But Ricky was persistent. He talked about the creature constantly, drew more pictures, wrote stories about their time together. His teacher called me in for a conference, concerned about Ricky's fixation on imaginary friends. I assured her it was just processing trauma, that he'd move past it eventually, but I knew he wouldn't, and I didn't want him to. Winter came early that year. Snow fell thick and heavy, blanketing the forest in white silence. The knocking stopped. No more gifts appeared on the porch. Torres called once to check in, asked if Ricky was adjusting okay, told her he was doing great, better than expected. She sounded relieved. "Kids are resilient," she said. "They bounce back from things that would break adults." I agreed with her, but I knew the truth. Ricky wasn't bouncing back. He was forever changed, and so was I. We'd seen something the world said didn't exist. We'd been touched by a mystery that most people spend their whole lives searching for, and we'd chosen to keep it secret. Spring brought new life to the Cascades. The snow melted, the creeks ran high, and the forest exploded with green growth. Ricky begged me daily to let him go back into the woods. "Just to visit," he'd say, "just to say thank you." I always refused. It was too risky. What if someone saw? What if the creature didn't remember him, didn't recognize him? What if it had moved on, found some other part of the forest to call home? But Ricky wore me down eventually. On a warm afternoon in May, nearly a year after he'd gone missing, we hiked back to the ridge. The clearing looked different in daylight, smaller, more ordinary. The logs where Ricky had sat were covered in moss. New ferns pushed up through the soil. There was no sign of the Bigfoot, no evidence that anything unusual had ever happened here. I felt a wave of disappointment mixed with relief. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe it was time to let the whole thing become a memory, a story we'd tell ourselves when we needed to remember that miracles could happen. But Ricky walked straight to the far end of the clearing, to a dense thicket of young cedars I hadn't noticed before. He cupped his hands around his mouth and made a sound, a low whooping call that echoed through the trees. I froze. "Ricky, don't!" But before I could finish, the sound came back, the same call, deeper and more resonant, from somewhere close by. And then the Bigfoot stepped out of the shadows. It was exactly as I remembered, massive, covered in dark hair, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. It approached slowly, cautiously, until it stood maybe 10 feet from where Ricky waited. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Ricky smiled and held out a small cloth bag. "I brought you something," he said. "Apples and some beef jerky. I thought you might like it." The Bigfoot reached out one enormous hand and took the bag gently. It opened it, sniffed the contents, then made a sound I can only describe as pleased, a low rumble that vibrated through my chest. Ricky laughed, actually laughed, and the Bigfoot made the sound again. I stood there watching them, this impossible interaction between a child and a creature that wasn't supposed to exist, and I felt something shift inside me. Fear became awe. Disbelief became acceptance. This was real. This was happening. And somehow, in a way I couldn't fully understand, it was beautiful. We visited the clearing 3 more times that summer, always carefully, always making sure no one followed us. Each time, the Bigfoot was there, waiting. It never approached the cabin again, never left gifts on our porch, but in that clearing, it seemed comfortable, present. Ricky would bring food, sometimes drawings or small trinkets he'd made. The creature always accepted them, sometimes leaving its own gifts in return. Interesting stones, carved pieces of wood, once a perfect bird skull, clean and white. I started keeping a journal. Nothing detailed, just notes about each visit, what we saw, how the Bigfoot behaved. I documented the sounds it made, the way it moved, the expressions I could read in its face, because yes, there were expressions, not human, but recognizable. Curiosity, pleasure, what I can only describe as affection when it looked at Ricky. I knew I was collecting evidence that I'd never share with anyone, but I needed to record it, for myself, for Ricky, maybe someday, for the world. The media had completely moved on by then. Ricky's story was filed away with thousands of other missing child cases that ended happily. We were normal again, boring. The sheriff never came back. Torres transferred to a different district. Our lives returned to routine, school, work, dinner, bedtime. Except for those summer afternoons when we'd pack a bag and hike into the woods to visit a creature that science said couldn't exist. Those moments felt more real than anything else. More real than bills and homework and grocery shopping. They were proof that the world was bigger, stranger, more wonderful than anyone wanted to admit. Ricky asked me once why we couldn't tell anyone. He was 9 by then, old enough to understand the implications. Because people would hurt him, I said simply. They'd want to study him, capture him, prove he exists. They wouldn't see him the way you do. They'd just see a discovery. Ricky thought about that for a while, then nodded. He's not a discovery, he said quietly. He's my friend. I pulled him close, kissed the top of his head. Exactly, I said. Exactly. On our last visit that summer, I brought my phone. I'd resisted the urge for over a year, afraid that having proof would make me want to share it. But I needed something more than memories and sketches. I needed to know, years from now, that this had really happened. While Ricky was showing the Bigfoot a new drawing, I pulled out my phone and hit record. Just 30 seconds. The creature looked up, noticed the phone, tilted its head. I thought it might run, but it didn't. It just watched me for a moment, then turned back to Ricky. Like it understood, like it trusted us. That video is locked away now, buried in folders, within folders, password protected and encrypted. I've watched it maybe 5 times in the years since, always alone, always late at night. Every time it takes my breath away, because it's real, because a Bigfoot stood there in that clearing and let a child show it a drawing, and I have proof. We moved away from the Cascades in 2016. My job transferred me to Seattle, and I thought the distance would be good for us. Good for Ricky, especially. He was getting older, asking harder questions, wanting to visit the clearing more often. I was afraid he'd get careless, tell a friend, post something online. The best protection I could give the Bigfoot was distance, physical separation, but I'd underestimated Ricky's connection to that creature, to that place. Every summer, he'd ask to go back. Every summer, I'd say no. Until the summer he turned 12, when he looked me in the eye and said, "I'm going with or without you." And I knew he meant it. So we went, drove 3 hours, hiked up the familiar trail, found the clearing just as we left it. The Bigfoot was there. Older, maybe? Or maybe I just perceived it differently after 2 years away. It recognized Ricky immediately, made that low rumbling sound of greeting. Ricky ran to it, and the creature knelt down, let him come close, closer than I'd ever been comfortable with. They sat together while I watched, and I realized this was Ricky's relationship, not mine. I was just the guardian, the keeper of the secret. We established a pattern after that. Every summer, 1 visit, sometimes 2, if schedules allowed. Always careful, always vigilant. I taught Ricky how to check for other hikers, how to cover our tracks, how to approach the clearing from different directions so we didn't wear a visible path. He learned well. Better than me, in some ways. He had a natural instinct for moving quietly, for reading the forest. The Bigfoot was teaching him things I couldn't. things about patience and observation and existing in balance with the wild. Torres reached out to me in 2018, 4 years after Ricky's disappearance. She'd retired, moved to Portland, but she'd never forgotten our case. "I need to know," she said over coffee. "What really happened to your son?" I looked at her across the table, this woman who'd been kind when others had been dismissive. I wanted to tell her. God, I wanted to share the burden of this secret, but I couldn't. "He got lost," I said simply, "and then he found his way back." She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Okay." We finished our coffee and parted ways. I never heard from her again. The knocking started again after that visit, even in Seattle. 3 soft raps on the sliding glass door of our apartment, always at 3 in the morning. There was no forest nearby, no place for a Bigfoot to hide. But I'd hear it anyway. 3 knocks, a reminder, a connection that distance couldn't break. I'd get up, go to the door, look out into the empty courtyard. Nothing there, just the feeling of being watched, the feeling of being remembered. Ricky left for college in 2022. He chose a school in Montana, close to the mountains, close to wild spaces. He video called me from his dorm room that first week, showed me the view from his window. Endless forest, snow-capped peaks in the distance. "I feel closer to him here," he said. I didn't have to ask who he meant. The Bigfoot had become a constant presence in Ricky's life, a North Star he oriented himself by. His major was environmental science. His focus was wildlife conservation. Everything circled back to protecting wild spaces, protecting creatures that couldn't protect themselves. We made the trip to the Cascades together over Thanksgiving break that year. The clearing was empty this time. We waited for hours, but the Bigfoot never came. Ricky was devastated. I tried to comfort him, told him maybe it had moved on, found new territory. Or maybe it died, Ricky said quietly. That possibility hung between us. How long did these creatures live? Did they age like humans? Were there others? We'd never seen evidence of a second Bigfoot, never heard stories from other hikers. Maybe the one Ricky had bonded with was alone. Maybe it had been alone for a very long time until it found a lost child who needed saving. But then, as we were packing up to leave, we heard it, the whoop. Low and distant, but unmistakable. Ricky whooped back, and we waited. 10 minutes later, the Bigfoot emerged from the trees on the far side of the clearing. It moved slower than I remembered, more carefully. When it came close enough, I saw white in its hair, gray patches around its face. It was aging, just like us. Ricky spent an hour with the creature that day. They didn't do anything special, just sat together in comfortable silence. I took photos this time, not video. Dozens of them. I figured if we were documenting the end of something, we should do it right. The creature seemed to understand. It looked directly at the camera several times, held still like it was posing. When we finally left, it followed us to the edge of the clearing, watched us walk away. Ricky turned back 3 times. Each time, the Bigfoot was still there, still watching. That was the last time we saw it. We went back the next summer, and the summer after that. The clearing was always empty. No signs, no sounds, no evidence that the Bigfoot had ever been there. Ricky took it hard. He'd spent half his life knowing this creature, building a relationship with it, and now it was gone. No goodbye, no closure, just absence. I told him that maybe that was the point. Maybe the Bigfoot had given us what we needed and moved on. Maybe it had found someone else who needed saving. I'm telling this story now because Ricky asked me to. He's 26, working for the Park Service, protecting the same forests where he met his protector. He thinks people should know. Not everything, maybe. Not the location of the clearing or the details that might draw hunters, but the truth that these creatures exist, that they're intelligent and gentle and worth protecting. I'm not sure I agree. Part of me still thinks the best protection is silence. But Ricky's right about one thing. Stories have power. And maybe, just maybe, this story will make someone think twice before they clear-cut a forest or shoot at something they don't understand. Maybe it'll inspire the same wonder in them that I felt watching my son sit peacefully next to a Bigfoot. That's worth the risk of telling it. That's worth breaking the silence